Well, time for another update. So yeah, my Bearhawk has finished the flight testing. It's been issued with a certificate of airworthiness. Flight testing went very well. I'll talk more about that. And we've just completed a 50-hour check on it. So I've got 10 hours on it on top of the flight testing. And here it is. Well, after completing the 40 hours of test flying, you can probably imagine I was pretty keen to get out and actually do some real-world flying in my Bearhawk. And so without further ado, I headed south one day. I took my son and went down to the lower part of the South Island and hooked up with a friend of mine, Grant. And Grant's got an awful lot of experience in backcountry flying. He set me up on some gravel bars. I did a lot of practice takeoffs and landings and really started to familiarise myself with handling, real-world handling on the Bearhawk. And a lot of that revolved around practicing the short takeoff and landings, particularly the approaches, and ensuring that I was able to hit my aim point every time. In this clip here, I'm going into a backcountry airstrip that's got a popular hiking hut at the top end. It's a sloping strip. I hadn't landed on a sloping strip before, so that took a little bit of getting used to. There was a lot of practice on gravel bars and just time after time getting used to hitting my aim point on the approaches. One of the things I found a little bit difficult was keeping the tail wheel up out of the debris and the stones. Here I am just positioning, ready to take off on a slight downhill slope. It's in a very big valley of a river that runs inland through the Southern Alps, and I had an awful lot of fun flying here on this day. I did a few practice approaches and departures. The Bearhawk, with just me on it, has no problems at all getting airborne, and here you can see I'm off the ground but still flying down the slope just to build up speed and reduce flap before turning out over the river. I've done most of my practice on fine weather days, and I've done a few things just to reduce risk while I'm relearning these skills, and a lot of it is actually new to me as well, particularly the bush flying in these mountains. I did it all 30 years ago when I was learning to fly and as a junior flying instructor, but that was a long time ago. So one of the things I've done is just start all of my initial flying on very fine days and light winds. A couple of other things I'm doing to mitigate risk is keeping the centre of gravity on the Bearhawk quite well forward and flying at light weights when I'm in the bush. I have had on a number of occasions 4 people in the aircraft, and I've had it loaded up to maximum all-up weight. No problem at all with doing that, but I prefer to leave that to the longer grass runways at the larger airfields. In the mountains, of course, I'm finding it pays for me just to keep things a little bit conservative. Here we are in quite a deep valley. Actually, this is an old Deer Colours airstrip. This one was plenty long enough. It was around 300 meters long, but it was very, very narrow. And that's one of the things that I've found that I have to become accustomed to. My friend was filming this one for me, and yeah, captured quite a lot of the dashboard. You can see that I'm touching down at around about 42 knots, but I do prefer to fly most of the approach at around the 50 knot mark. It gives good handling, good over the nose visibility, and just reducing back the speed to the stall speed right in the last, say, 20 feet or so. During the test flying phase, I used that opportunity to test every part of the Bearhawk out that I could. In a previous video you may have seen I was testing the fuel system just to make sure that it worked as I expected it to work. I did numerous stalls in all different flap configurations, power on, power off. I added vortex generators to the main wings, and subsequently in the last few hours I've also added vortex generators underneath the horizontal stabilizer, and that's to give a little bit of added elevator authority. That's because I found that with the added weight of the IO 540 engine up front, at a very forward center of gravity and at low speeds when I reduced the power, perhaps if I was high on profile, it was a little bit difficult to retain elevator authority. The vortex generators have helped just enough, and with no adverse effects anywhere else in the flight regime. So I've had a lot of fun testing the aircraft, and the end result is that now I have a lot of confidence in it. It's become very predictable for me to fly. I'm finding that when I set up on approach, I tend to just automatically bring the speed back to 50 knots on a slightly steeper than normal profile, set it up there with full flap, and I can bring it all the way down. I'm now able to recover if I set the profile up inadvertently too steep. You can see here just practicing, and this clip was fairly early on when I was flying very conservatively, just a standard circuit. And a lot of these runways, this is my home airport here at Ashburton, a lot of these runways have a displaced threshold, and so they have a white marker board on each side of the grass runway, and that's really handy as an aiming point. You can see here a fairly conservative approach. The speed is probably around 50 knots, I'm not sure, because I don't really look at it. The reason is I've got an aural angle of attack audio in the headset. A lot of these early landings I was floating past my aim point, and usually that was because I was just carrying a little bit extra speed on final approach. You can see there that's probably, I'm guessing, maybe 30-40 meters past the aim point. I didn't realize that until it really became important in the mountains, and once I started landing on the shorter airstrips, it became very obvious to me that I had been floating past that aim point. This one here, you can see the two white marker boards, one on each side of the grass runway, and I was trying to keep them in sight all the way down, and the technique I've developed, I can actually view them over the nose cowling, which is quite handy. See, once again, I've just floated a little bit past the aim point there. So what I decided to do, as I got better and better, I started hitting the aim point quite consistently, and at that stage I realized that it was no longer about hitting my aim point. I was quite confident after going and doing several trips into the mountains that I was able to touch down where I wanted to, and that running out of runway was not going to be the issue. But a lot of these airstrips are very narrow, and actually staying within the width of them I thought was more likely to be an issue for me. So I started landing with the left wheel right alongside the left side of the grass runway, and that's what I'm doing in this clip here. In this video there was quite a healthy crosswind from the left, probably 10 or 12 knots, enough that it's actually quite hard to see the grass runway in the camera. I had initially been using the white marker boards at the start of the runway as an aim point, but the problem was I was catching a lot of turbulence off those hangers there. So you can see a crossing runway in the view there, and what I'm actually doing is I'm using the V shape at the far end of the crossing runway as my touchdown point for the left wheel. I'm trying to run the left tire along the very edge of the grass runway, and that's to simulate landing on a very narrow runway where there's literally just two tracks through the grass, and that was really good practice. Over several days with different crosswinds around the 10 to 15 knot mark, I changed from left to right, and just gradually increased my proficiency so that I wasn't having to think about it too much. Once I got used to landing in a very narrow width of runway, then the next issue I had was that I was landing typically with a three-pointer every time. And in the Bearhawk I've noticed that a three-pointer is by far the easiest landing to do. You still retain good crosswind control in the three-pointer, but one issue with it is if you're landing on a rough airstrip in the backcountry, as I had done on a number of occasions, once that tail wheel touches, and they often do touch slightly ahead of the mains, then it transmits all of the vibration and shock through the airframe. So I wanted to develop a technique where I'm actually landing on the main wheels and allowing the main shock absorbers to absorb the initial touchdown and all of the stress from landing on rough ground. I've actually had good success doing that. I haven't done any videos of it yet, but the last 3 or 4 practice sessions just at the Ashburton airfield here have made a lot of progress in that area, and I'm coming in at about the same speed, and then just before touchdown just lowering the nose and putting the main wheels on first and keeping the tail clear until I'm down to about probably 20 knots. So I'll show that in an upcoming video. and still in this clip just practicing the takeoffs as well. With my takeoffs, what I'm doing is trying to get airborne at close to the minimum speed, and then allowing the aircraft to accelerate, retracting flap, and then climbing away at sort of 80 to 90 knots. Now it is capable of a very steep climb out. I tested to see what the maximum body angle was that I could get at a higher altitude, and was able to get around 25 degrees sustained. Obviously if you pull it up abruptly, you can get a much higher pitch attitude, but down low I'm not really a fan of that, so flying fairly conservatively at this stage and just retracting the flap as I get airborne, allowing it to weather vane into wind, and then flying away at a safe speed. So overall, made good progress there, and I'm thoroughly enjoying flying my Bearhawk into the backcountry. I've got a flyaway that I'm attending, hopefully pending weather, at the end of the week. So I'll try and get some decent video footage there for the next update. Thanks again for watching, and I'll try and get another update out in a few more weeks.